From fabulous Las Vegas, Nevada, this is Pod Therapy. Real people, real problems, and real therapists. Do you want free advice? Visit us at podtherapy.net or tweet to us at podtherapyguys to submit your questions to the show. It's episode 4, and we have our first guest ever. So this is awesome. She is a great therapist, talented and personable. Let's hope she doesn't start her own podcast.
Yeah!
And now, broadcasting from Level 9 Studios, that guy's Dr. Jim Jobin. I'm Nick Tangeman. It's time for some pod therapy. Okay, welcome everybody. Welcome to the show. So we are super excited today.
Yes. Pumped.
Yes, we have our first ever
Talented
guest.
Therapist. Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. A guest. A guest is probably what you were going to say.
Yeah, that too.
I'm glad for that too.
So in the studio today, we have with us Sydney Smith. A little bit about Sydney. She's the founder of RISE, Center for Recovery in Las Vegas. She's a therapist, PhD candidate at Pacifica Graduate Institute, an author, researcher, lecturer, licensed alcohol and drug counselor, licensed professional counselor.
Secretly Wonder Woman.
National certified gambling counselor. Okay, well, welcome to the show. I'm exhausted just saying all of that.
You're a busy woman.
That made me sound really good.
You're a very busy person.
Yeah.
When do you sleep?
Sparingly.
You're a mom too, aren't you?
Yes.
Oh my goodness.
2 kids.
2 kids?
Yeah.
Jeez. Okay.
12
so
and almost 9.
and soon to be Nobel Prize recipients, I'm sure. So
Yeah, I was feeling good about myself. This is why I like having Sydney around. This is why we're really good friends, is because I start feeling really good about myself.
yeah.
And then I talk to her and I realize I haven't done anything with my life.
Yeah, that's true. No, I'm actually super duper sad that she's here because now the listener's going to realize how little we know. Because before they're like, you know what, these guys are the 2 smartest people in the room, and now that's not true anymore. So now it's like, okay, we're gonna wing it.
That was inevitable.
Bring your A game today, Nick.
All right. So before we get started, one of the things that Jim and I wanted to do when we first started this podcast, one of our big things, we wanted to kind of make mental health and addiction more mainstream and kind of pull back the curtains, let people, the average person, get to experience what's actually going on to kind of take away some of the fear. We had talked about how important it is to have guests on the show, guests with specialty, guests with specialties, somebody who can bring something to the table that's just really interesting. So when we were talking about this, the first person I thought of was, we got to get Sydney Smith.
Yes, I remember this.
So
first thing you said.
It's very fitting that you are our first guest. So to start with, you're local here in Las Vegas. Can you tell us a little bit about RISE?
So RISE is a comprehensive addiction treatment center, and we have intensive outpatient program, and we work with all addictions, also mental health, depression, anxiety, a lot of the common mental health symptoms. But we have a primary specialty focus in gambling addiction.
Right.
So, so we work a lot with the gamblers and the family members. And so,
right. And so whenever I think about gambling treatment, you are always the first person I think of. Because considering we live in Las Vegas, it's everywhere. This city was built on gambling.
Right.
But as far as gambling treatment, it's Sydney.
Right.
That's what she does. So, that's who I think of.
I used to think of Dr. Robert Hunter, but then I know you were with him for a long time. And then you ended up starting your own program.
Yes. I've started the family program for Dr. Hunter, and then I broke away and
there it is.
built RISE.
Yeah. Hunter's old news.
He's still here, by the way.
He's still here.
Nothing against Dr. Hunter. He's great.
Yeah.
he's great.
Today's podcast is sponsored by the Problem Gambling Center with Dr. Robert Hunter.
So I know you have kind of an interesting background, kind of an interesting story about how you got interested in gambling. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that? What piqued your interest in this?
Well, I'm originally from Oklahoma, and I'm Native American, Cherokee. And so Oklahoma was a non-gaming state. I think the extent of our gambling was bingo. And then in the early 2000s, tribal gaming came in. And so I was already a clinician working in the schools, frontline, and I saw a huge shift, in the people and the problems and the issues that were starting to happen.
Awesome.
Yeah. And there was a lot of positive things, too, with the economy and gambling the gaming brought in a lot of positive, aspects to the state. But then, there was no safety net to help all these people that were starting to develop gambling addiction.
And, I want to ask a question about that. So you are a gambling addiction specialist. So you're constantly interacting with people who are experiencing the harms of this. But your curiosity and your interest in this subject really began in Oklahoma when you saw gambling come in. And I hear you saying there were some positives as well. Here you are in Las Vegas. What is your view? I mean, you are a gambling expert. Are you against it? Are you for it? I mean, as an alcohol counselor, sometimes it's like, well, maybe we'd be better off without it. But what do you think about gambling as a concept for society?
I think it's a good question because you're right. A lot of people don't really ask that, or what's your stance on it. But for me personally, I'm neither for nor against gaming. I don't believe it's, either the gambling's fault or the casino, anything like that. I believe, the addiction lives within the person. I think, under the right circumstance, anything can grow, right?
Right.
So, so I take a neutral stance to gaming.
Okay.
Yeah.
You hear that, Caesars? So sponsor the show.
Completely neutral.
Yeah. Pop Therapy is brought to you by Caesars Entertainment Group.
Well, and one thing that I was going to ask you too, because for us living in Las Vegas, I mean, it's part of our daily life. We can't go to a grocery store without seeing slot machines.
That's
like
right.
they're everywhere, right?
Yep.
And so it becomes very easy to think of addiction taking place here in Las Vegas. But can you tell us a little bit about what gambling addiction is like outside of Las Vegas, outside of Atlantic City? Because this is more than just a casino thing. Like this is all over the United States.
Yeah, so I'll take that question and I'll backtrack just a minute. But, a lot of times you ask people, think about gambling or, gaming, what's the first thing that comes to mind? And they think casino. But yeah, like you're saying, that's not true. Gambling comes in all forms. And it could be, bingo, stock markets, lotto, horse betting. In Hawaii, cockfighting is a huge thing.
Right.
And so, we're talking about online betting, the racetrack. So the extent can be huge, right? So it doesn't have to necessarily mean Las Vegas, gambling. But I think, here Vegas or Nevada in general has the highest prevalence rates of gambling among any other state. So, we have a higher percentage of people that live here and work here that have gambling problems. However, it's the same in all 50 states. Gambling is legalized in 48 of 50 states. Utah and Hawaii are the only two that don't have legalized gaming. But, they get around it by just putting people on the ships, and sending them over the line. Or, a lot of people from Utah will come here. But now that you have online gaming, you can literally, gamble anywhere.
On that note, too, what has been the effect of fantasy football in the gambling world? It seems like it started off as this sort of fun, playful thing. And now when I'm watching commercials and I see fantasy football on there, I'm like, this looks a lot like our casino commercials. And it's like on NFL Sunday. Is that becoming gambling? What do you think about that?
Right. Well, the definition of gambling is anytime you make a wager or a bet where the outcome is unknown. So it doesn't necessarily have to be money. It could be, I'm betting on fantasy sport. Have people relapse that are in recovery on fantasy sports or even on the pull tabs at McDonald's. I want to pop, because it activates something, in the brain.
Interesting.
Yeah. So, or I bet you I can run across the street faster than you.
Wow.
So it can come in different forms, not just, I'm betting a dollar amount on the specific.
Right. Anytime, and again, the definition of gambling is a behavior in which you do not know the outcome. The outcome is unknown, and you're addicted to. Is it like you're addicted to the suspense? Like what is it that becomes addictive about that?
I think there's a lot more studies that can be done. Gambling's relatively new compared to other addictions. It's just gotten the DSM pretty recently in the 5. Insurance now pays for gambling treatment.
Wow.
Although they're a little bit behind times, it's good for the consumer who, normally would be denied services for gambling. And the insurance usually say, well, you don't have a drug or alcohol problem.
Right.
So, we can't pay for your treatment. So they're starting to get on board now, even though they're moving a little slow. So it's good for people who are actually needing help. But, in terms of the addictive factor, it activates a lot of the same stuff in the brain that the other addictions do. It looks very, very similar. And then there's it really affects the impulse control center. It is a disease rooted in impulse control. And so, we see some brain the biology in the brain actually changes as well.
That's amazing.
Even though you're not actually putting anything into your body. So I think that's the misconception is, I'm not ingesting anything. So
it's not a chemical addiction, but a process addiction is what we call that. So it's similar to maybe sex addiction.
Sex addiction.
Okay, or video game addiction.
Very, very similar. Gaming addiction looks very much like gamblers. I know Nick can attribute to this as well, but you can have a 10-year-old who has a severe gaming addiction that looks like our 65-year-old gamblers. They're suicidal. They the consequences and the symptoms that they're experiencing from it are very, very similar.
Right, and that's one thing that I learned while we went to a training together, right? And one of the things that I thought was really interesting that I'd never really thought about in terms of what makes gambling addiction different than a substance use addiction. I never really put a lot of thought into it, but one thing that I heard was that the suicide is more of an issue because if I'm an alcoholic and I'm doing behaviors that go against my value system and my morals, I can attribute that to my state of mind. I was under the influence. There's nothing I can do about it.
Yeah.
When you have a gambling addiction and you're doing things outside of your morals, you don't have that excuse to fall back on that, well, I was in an impaired state.
Right.
And so you're kind of left with that guilt. And so that becomes something that can potentially lead to
and much less understood, right? As well. I mean, alcohol, people go, oh, well, you drink too much. Gambling, a lot of people aren't even aware there is such a thing as gambling addiction.
Right, that's so true. The power of the gambling addiction itself is very underestimated. Even people that are aware. But yeah, many people still don't believe it can actually be a real addiction. And I know in Las Vegas is the first time I heard the term, and I've been in the field for a really long time. But the term degenerate gambler. It's like this very demeaning, kind of demoralizing, and like Nick said. With this disease, there's a lot of shame and guilt that goes into it. A gambler feels shame. I think even the family of the gambler can feel the shame and guilt much more intensely than people who are, suffering from other addictions. There's a different level there.
Is suicidal thinking common in your patients?
Yes. I would say 99.9% of the patients that walk through my door, by the time they walk through, have admitted to having some suicidal thoughts in their past. And the suicide rate among gamblers is higher than even above mental illness, but bipolar and schizophrenia.
Wow.
And so the reality is most gamblers will die before they seek out treatment.
And that's amazing because it's so easy to say, oh, this isn't a disease. This doesn't concern healthcare. Clearly it does. Clearly this is a cause of death if not treated.
Absolutely. Wow. I mean, this is this costs in society, millions and millions of dollars. You look at the mental health, the time off from work, the missing the embezzlement, sickness, there's even a lot of withdrawal symptoms that come along with gambling. Most people wouldn't believe that's the case as well,
Wow.
And so.
Wow. Yeah. So one of the things that you had mentioned earlier too was the effects on the family. So you had written a book, and it was like a workbook for families, essentially, right?
Yeah, it's meant to be used as a resource guide, kind of a tool.
Right.
Yeah, and interactive.
Which I thought was really funny because just on a personal level, I've known you for several years, and you never mentioned that you were writing a book until
you failed the first test of being an author.
I was
You're
writing
supposed to
it
tell
in my
everybody.
head.
Yeah. I, on the other hand, have told lots of people all the books that I am writing and have never finished any of them. They are all like in drafts in Gmail. So we're the opposite. Yeah, you actually accomplish things and don't tell people. I tell people I do things that I did not do.
So with this, can you tell us a little bit about some of the challenges that family members of the gambling addict might have and might face?
Right, which was the reason that, I wrote the book, because also I've been personally affected. Like I said, I was in Oklahoma, and I have lived with family members and loved ones that have had gambling problems. So I've lived on both sides of the fence, even as a former spouse. And so I feel like I understand, that perspective. And I know even when I was going through it, there was not any help, there was like there was one GA meeting in the state at the time, and this was years ago.
Gamblers Anonymous.
Gamblers Anonymous, yes. And it was like 120 miles away.
Wow.
So, there was, I think, a handful of clinicians in the entire state that was actually even trained in gambling, which is, the other issue of finding, people that's aware, that's working with the addiction, as even therapists in the therapeutic community, because it is treated slightly different than the other addictions. And so writing this book was really important because sometimes as family members, we experience the consequence of the addiction, right? No matter what it is.
Right.
But with gambling, it can be very hidden for so long before it's even surfaced. It's almost like an invisible disease because I can't smell it on you. I can't give you a test to see if you've been gambling.
You discover from your bank account.
Right. You follow the money. And it can happen. And, a gambler could gamble 10 years and nobody really know the extent. And then all of a sudden you answer your door and the repo man's there. They're foreclosing on your house. You had 3 mortgages that you didn't know about, the gambler's taking out credit cards in the spouse's name, so the devastation can be severe, right? There could be a lot of wreckage that could be found out, or the person could know all along, but then still not know the extent of it. And, as family members of anybody that has an addiction, family can get sick too. We get just as sick as long, with them and in their course of, in their course of the disease too. So the book was really meant to be a resource tool. And especially in the tribal communities, I work really closely in a lot of the rural communities. Nevada has a lot of rural communities. It's just not, possible sometimes to even get to a therapist, let alone one that has, experience working with gambling. And so what we know in tribal communities is the prevalence rates for developing gambling addiction is higher, but still a lot of people are unaware that this can be a real addiction. We know all about drugs and alcohol, of course, and how we're impacted. But gambling's still the iffy one, and
so ironic because this is Las Vegas. We're famous for literally one thing.
Right.
We should have the best gambling treatment in the history of the world. Like, I promise you, Cape Town, Africa, where all the great white sharks are, they have a clinic that treats great white shark bites, pretty effectively.
Right,
But we don't seem to take it as seriously. It doesn't sound like our community sort of has that innate knowledge, but that's something you're on a campaign to change. And, with your
mission.
company and with your book writing and with your appearances on very influential podcasts like Pod Therapy.
Right. Yeah, I'm sure this is a big turning step for Sydney.
Yeah. Nobody knew about this till she showed up on Pod Therapy.
You made me a star. Pod Therapy.
Well, we're makers, Sydney.
It's the alchemical process, right?
That's right.
We're in the pot.
Yeah. And actually, what is the name of the book?
The name of the book is Gambling, the Spirit That Talks in Your Ear So Your Heart Can't Hear.
Great title.
That is great. Where is it available?
It's in the final stages of publishing right now.
Okay.
So we hope that it'll be available online. And then actually, I've been very fortunate that the Desert Research Institute here in town, DRI, and the head Beverly Ramsey has actually, there's some funding that they're going to put in and publish a bunch of copies, and they're going to be give them away for free.
Oh my
We're going to take them out to the tribal communities and give them to all the tribal health clinics throughout Nevada. So that way, even the rural locations can use them as a tool.
That's terrific.
So,
yeah, that's awesome. That's great.
Yeah, so shout out to DRI.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
I'm a huge fan of DRI.
So the other thing that I kind of wanted to touch base on, some new trends happening in gaming. So what we're seeing now in Nevada is we're seeing skill-based gaming kind of start making its appearance. Can you tell us a little bit about what that is and why you as a gambling addictions professional would be concerned about that?
Yeah, so skill-based gaming, really the landscape of gaming and gambling is changing right now. And we're seeing a lot of more merging between the gaming industry, actual video gaming, and, the gambling industry. And what actually happened this year was that they've created the new skill-based games where they actually designed to look like a video game, so you can actually play people all across the world. I could go into the Palazzo or the Venetian, and I can sit down in a machine, and then it's like I'm there and playing my own video game at home, but yet I'm playing for money.
Oh my gosh.
And it's a new form of skill-based gambling that's coming out.
Guys, I gotta go. I gotta
Where'd Jim go?
Yeah, where'd Jim go? Well, no, it's interesting because when I hear that, my first reaction is, oh my gosh, that sounds so much fun. And like I'm thinking, oh, I think you targeted me, didn't you, Caesars? Because I'm a millennial. So it's like, okay, I wasn't pulling the switch enough.
You are
so
correct.
now they're aiming at me because it's harder to impress me with like the pulling the little lever and seeing the bars swing around.
Yep.
Now I'm like, ooh, well, I'll go play against the people. But then my second thought is, this is terrifying because I'm already throwing my controller when I lose at Pac-Man. Now I lost $20. And so now it's like it hurts twice now.
Right.
Fantastic.
Right. But then if you think about, even our iPhones and the games on our iPhone and the buying of skins and Candy Crush and now I need more lives. And, if you look at the games on our phone, what do they sound like? What do they look like? They sound like the games in the casino.
Light bulb just went off in my head because there's that Clash of Clans game, and I forbid my children to play it because I'm angry at the fact that if you lose, you have to pay $15 or something to play again, or you have to wait 48 hours to play. And so that is essentially skills-based gaming.
Exactly.
Where, oh my gosh. Okay.
And so now with this merger that's coming along, I don't know if this is appropriate to say.
We can
off
edit it
the
later.
record, quote unquote, hypothetically speaking, our kids are playing games that are designed to roll right into the gaming industry.
Oh my gosh. All right, that's it. I'm dropping Caesars as a sponsor. Caesars, you're no longer sponsoring Pod Therapy. We're done. But MGM, we have an opening.
So that's interesting. So it's almost kind of like if I'm operating a casino, I can just jump in and kind of take over where the apps on my iPhone stop, right? I mean, it just kind of rolls right into.
So they're training us
gaming.
early to already know how to do this stuff.
Right.
And then now we can gamble on our phones. And then when we show up in a place where there is some more gambling, it's familiar to us now. We don't have to learn how to do it. We already know how to do it.
I was looking at an app the other day with one of my friends, and so you could actually do online gaming where you can. It's almost like the pull lever casino, gaming, and it rolls up on your phone.
Wow!
And you could actually play a game where you bet baby Jesuses. You get 3 baby Jesus in the row. You
that
win.
Is wow!
Hit the jackpot.
That is phenomenally sacrilegious. Wow, the blasphemy has really increased on Pod Therapy. I'm going to just say it.
No,
You're fine with it.
I'm okay with it.
I'm just pointing it out.
But
it just cracks me up.
That is pretty funny.
You can bet baby Jesus.
You can bet anything.
That's it. You're crossing the line, gambling.
So one of the other questions that I had that I wanted to ask was, we've talked about how the addiction can easily be hidden from the family. What would be some warning signs? What either the gambler themselves or the family member, what are the things that they would look for that would indicate this has gone from a hobby or just something for pleasure into problematic?
Yeah, I think the person, if they're questioning that they have a problem, or even if the family, if they're questioning if their loved ones might have a problem, they can really look at time away. It increases in time. Before I might be gone 20 minutes. Now I'm gone 3 days. I say I'm going to get a pizza, but you don't see me for 48 hours. I actually had a client that did that. He would always say I'm going out for a pizza, and the wife would not see him for 2 days, but she said he always brought the pizza back.
He meant Italy.
It was like 2 days.
He went to Italy to get you a fresh pizza from the Caesar, not Little Caesar. You're welcome.
Right.
Yeah.
A lot of times trying to get a hold of somebody and there's no answer. A lot of times there's no phone service in the casinos, or they turn off their phone.
Oh, right.
There's a disassociated state that gamblers go into, so they lose track of time.
Wow.
And they also, kind of go into a blackout or a trance state. So, they're not listening for phones, or they're not listening for anything. They're just kind of in the zone. So completely unaccounted for time. So when I say, gone missing almost, in a sense.
Wow.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
So that's a huge warning sign. If you have a loved one doing that, or if you notice that in yourself, it might be time for an evaluation.
And even looking at the money trail, is money, mysteriously disappearing. Even from like the spouse's perspective, is money disappearing? I have money gone all the time. Be like, what happened to that?
Yeah.
Did I, you must have lost it.
Yeah. So I have kids, and my money seems to mysteriously disappear all the time.
Maybe they're buying skins on the video games.
Yeah, I think that's it. I think that's what's going on. I'm going to have to look into this. I'm going to send my son to your clinic. He's 8. How young will you treat them?
From embryo.
Yeah.
No, so look, following the money trail, and it's really good at, even if a family member suspects, that they also run credit checks on themselves to just look, make sure no credit cards been taken out, make sure no additional loans have been taken out on their homes. If you know somebody that is actively gambling, it's very smart to remove your name from the bank accounts, remove access, because if somebody does have a gambling addiction, they are in action. Doesn't matter how smart of a person they are, they're always going to kind of be done with money, and they're going to make those decisions. It's like if I was smoking meth, the crack pipe might be my trigger or tinfoil, but with gambling, it's money. So the money is actually can become a trigger for them. So it's good to have money safeguards in place and do asset protection, which I call is like AKA save your A.
Assets. Cover your assets.
Yeah, exactly. So there's a lot of work that the family can do, even in one session.
Right.
That we just might not think of, especially if we're angry or we're kind of in the middle of an addiction. As for the gambler too, is there mood swings? Gamblers often mimic bipolar. So even as clinicians, we always want to do a bipolar rollout on a gambler, because I've had many times where gamblers come in and they're like, "Oh yeah, I was diagnosed bipolar. Oh yeah, I'm on these bipolar meds." And I'm like, "Did you tell your psychiatrist you were gambling?"
Part of the manic stage is that they're poor judgment, doing really impulsive things.
Right. So if they're truly bipolar, they can gamble, and they can look like a problem gambler in manic state. However, it could be the flip.
Interesting.
But the changes in the mood swings are severely up and down, and so they could actually very much look like bipolar.
I see.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah. Great. So if any of our listeners want to reach out to you, where can they find you?
risehelp.com, or they can call 702-476-9700. We're at Rise Center for Recovery over in Green Valley, kind of over behind the district, to our new location.
Yeah.
We do have a state funding for problem gambling, so we're actually able to offer no-cost services to not only the gambler, but to the family members to come in, and that can be up to 9 to 12 hours a week. And so it can be intensive, or they can come in for 1 or 2 sessions.
All right, listeners, there's no excuse. It's no excuse. We got free books. We got free therapy. Get up.
Yeah.
Go cover your A.
Are you on Are you on Twitter or Facebook?
We're on Facebook. Okay. And we have an interactive new internet site now. So our website. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Sydney, for coming in. We really appreciate it. Do you want to stick around, help us answer some listener mail?
I would love to.
Yes. We're going to avoid the lawsuits.
Juicy stuff.
Finally some estrogen in the room.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so our first mail comes to us anonymously. Title, How Can I Make Myself Be Sexually Attracted to My Nice Guy Boyfriend? So I generally date guys that have some sort of emotional baggage and are therefore not emotionally stable. I chase them the whole relationship. They stay in it half-heartedly until inevitably they break it off and I'm heartbroken yet again. I know this is a problem within myself and one I'm actively working on to change. My current boyfriend and I started dating, and I've never been treated this well before. He is sweet and considerate and genuinely a nice person. I enjoy hanging out with him. I enjoy cuddling with him, but having sex with him is not something I want to do. We have sex and I enjoy it, but the thought of him in bed almost turns me off. He's not bad at it by any means. Physically, he's just not my type, but he's cute. How can I learn to be sexually attracted to him as I am emotionally?
So I asked my wife this question, Nick. She said, marry him.
How do you do it?
Marry him and have kids. It'll happen eventually. She stared me right in the eye when she said that. So I thought it was very odd. But that is a great question. I think a lot of people could relate to this. This is something that I'm so glad we have a female perspective on. I want to reach into a little bit of a marriage and family therapy angle. We have something called the triangle theory of love. And basically what we think of is like you're mixing a little potion, right? And in everybody's little love potion, there's different amounts of different things. And so the 3 things we think about mixing together are passion, which is like that erotic intimacy, general intimacy, and then commitment. So if you have a relationship that's all intimate and no passion or commitment, that's like being in the friend zone. You're very close to them. If you have a relationship that's all passion, no intimacy or commitment, that's shallow but very sensual, right? That's a fling. And if you have all commitment, no passion, no intimacy, that's an arrangement. There's no warmth. It's just a thing that you've put together to build a family around. What I hear in this person's writing is they've kind of achieved that blending of intimacy and commitment, but they don't quite have the passion. And in the past, they've had mostly passion. And so we actually call that companionate love. And I think that is a place where you can start from and you can build in other things. There's a myth out there that eroticism is instinctive and only instinctive. And so like either you're attracted to them or you're not, period. And that's not completely true. Most humans go through phases and they change what they like and they change what they're attracted to. And it depends on the stage of life they're in. And the qualities they're looking for in a mate do change over time. And I think the writer is sort of changing her qualities that she values in the kind of man that she's choosing now to date compared to the other ones she did. So my advice is to actually pick up a great book. It's by Esther Perel, and it's called Mating in Captivity. And she talks about how sexual eroticism sort of increases when there's a little bit of a distance between us. A quote from her book is, "Eroticism resides in the ambiguous space between fascination and anxiety." And so her point in that is when we become overly familiar and connected to somebody, there's sort of a dampening of the eroticism. There's a way to re-achieve that or to ignite that. And that sort of becomes something where you emotionally distance yourself to an extent and sort of create a space for there to be strangeness and difference between you. That way it sort of reignites the unfamiliar. And so that would be my first advice, is check out that book and consider that your relationship has quality aspects that you value in your little love potion, but there's ways to actually build up the passion and the eroticism side to kindle that. It sounds like it's something that hasn't been there before, so they're trying to start it for the first time. Now, that's what a dude thinks. Let's get some female perspective on that. Sydney, what do you think about that?
Well, not from a marriage and family perspective, but I'm just kind of wondering, is she settling in some way? I mean, kind of it sounds like there's might be something missing to that, and what needs are not being met that,
she's playing it safe. It sounds like.
Mm-hmm.
Which makes sense. I mean, if she's trying something different, and because essentially it sounds like she's taking the opposite role of what the guy usually takes. So,
Right.
She says that usually it's the male that goes into something half-heartedly, and I would kind of wonder if she is also kind of going into it half-heartedly, but
Right.
Just kind of a fear, almost like, well, I don't want to go into the same old relationship that I always used to be in. So I applaud you for doing something different and trying something different, and trying to date a man that you wouldn't typically date. But I guess my thought was just, are you doing it half-heartedly? Are you putting in everything?
Yeah, no, here's a change of direction for both of you guys. Is there a factor in this where you might look at the story and go, this person's growing up? You used to date bad boys who had no emotional depth and were not there for you, but it was physically sensational because they're exciting and different, and there's this curiosity about it, and you're attracted to it. And now you're doing a grown-up thing. You're finding a responsible, decent guy, but you don't feel that firework charisma. Is there a part of this where you might look at this if this was your client and say, hey, this is okay. It's okay that you don't have the old explosive sexual experience. This is growing up. Now you're settling in a sense, but you're maturing. Is that a possibility?
Yeah, I think so. But I also think, for some reason, based on this little paragraph, it sounds like, there's some hesitancy in that and just kind of exploring that, what is underneath that. Not that it's right or wrong, or to stay in it or not to stay in it. There's no right or wrong to it. But also, kind of what's her motivation in this too. That would be my question.
Yeah.
And how long have they been together? How long has she been trying this?
Right. Sounds like it's a new relationship.
Right. So maybe that would, going back to your family therapy perspective, Jim, is there some kind of a deadline that you would then set to have expectations of when things are going to get better? Like, how long would somebody in this situation stay in this relationship before deciding, like, oh, well, maybe this just isn't there, and maybe I need to find somebody that meets all three of the categories?
I think that's fair. That's a good question. So if this was my client, if she came in and said, so here's the thing, like, I'm concerned, I guess the first thing I want to do is normalize it. And I want to say, okay, so you're used to sexual greatness, but you were unsatisfied in the relationships, right? So we're changing things, and the little love formula changes, right? So we've rebalanced and recalibrated. The first thing I want her to do is, like, give this an honest try. And it sounds like that's what she's doing, because her advice question is, how can I teach myself to be more sexually attracted to this guy? I think all of us feel a little uncomfortable with that language, but that's why I reference Esther Perel, because there is a way to sort of intentionally reapproach erotic passion. And a lot of us don't think there is any way to do that. We just think it is or it isn't. But that's not the case. You can train your human appetites and your human desires and focus them. You can't completely fundamentally change them, but there is a way to sort of engage them intentionally and maybe redirect them a little bit.
Right.
And she mentions he provides the needs, the intimacy needs, and then, I guess the closeness or the physical touch portion. And I'm wondering, was she deficit in those things in her prior relationships? And is, this person feeling a lot of those unmet needs and kind of exploring that a little bit more?
Absolutely.
Too.
Good advice, folks. I like it. It's so nice to have a female perspective in here because now I say things and if she doesn't wince, I'm like, okay, this is good. It's going to be
instant
okay.
feedback.
It's that instant feedback of the female listener. Yep. All right, so I'll read the next one. Our next question comes in from somebody by the tag name Throwaway Beard, and the question is titled, "My girlfriend of 3 years quit her high-paying job a year and a half ago and wants me to get a second job to support her." And this is what he writes. "A year and a half ago, my girlfriend decided to quit her high-paying job to pursue her dream of being a hairdresser. Suffice to say, she isn't bringing in the amount of clients she wants, so money isn't coming in like it used to for her. I've always been financially responsible, and in the past, I was able to put money in savings after paying all the bills. Because she doesn't drive, I have to take her to and from work and run whatever errands she needs. She doesn't cook, so I usually end up buying the food, which is more financial stress. Then she decides to tell me I need to put in more effort in our relationship because I'm not bringing in money for us to go anywhere, so she tells me to go get a second job. But I think that since I'm employed full-time and going to school, and since she only works 20 to 25 hours a week, she should have to get the second job. Her response is that the man should take care of the woman. Am I wrong for not wanting a second job when she has the time to get one, or is she being unreasonable?"
Okay, that's a good question. I think in any relationship, there's going to be sacrifice, right? So we always talk about how a relationship is not going to be split evenly 50-50 all the time. There's going to be days where it's 60-40, days where it's 70-30, sometimes even 80-20, with the idea that over time there is a homeostasis that's achieved and we're getting to 50-50, right? So when I thought about this, as I read this, my immediate thought was kind of thinking about how we can, in a relationship, make a sacrifice to support someone's dream. If I'm in a relationship and my significant other wants to be an actress and she wants to pursue acting, I want to support that. And that means that there are going to have to be some sacrifices that are made, and maybe I have to pick up the slack a little bit because I love this person and I want to help them get to their goal. Now, that being said, there also then has to be some sort of balance going the other way. And there's always things that can be done other than, monetary compensation, other than, if that means that he has to pick up another job, then is there something hopefully that she can do to kind of recognize his sacrifice to give back to the relationship? And, if I can't help financially here, then I will do something else. I will take on a bigger responsibility in some other aspects.
All right. So this is a great question to have a female therapist on. He says a very important statement here. He says that his wife, his girlfriend, says the man should take care of this. This is your responsibility. It's in your wheelhouse. What is your reaction to that?
Well, my first initial thought was, he has the basic human right to say no.
Right.
Yeah. It sounds like, he's feeling overwhelmed, and they both have different expectations at this point, but for him, he's saying, am I wrong for not wanting a second job? It's like, I think he's, I don't want to put, opinion in it, but I think he can say no if he wants to say no.
Yeah.
And he can give her choices. She has choices as well, and she's only choosing to work 20 or 25 hours a week. But at the same time, talking about what is their expectation of this and what is their expectation of their roles
right.
as well.
So I'm going to say this right now. You're both better therapists than me because you're both sitting here saying, I'm not going to bring my opinion into this, but I'm coming in with a hammer. I'm furious. Okay. And I'm holding my rage. So I'm not going to try to get all Bernie Sanders on this thing. All right. But we live in a different world. Okay. And we do not live in the world of the 1940s anymore where the fella just goes down to the Ford factory and he comes back with a nice fat paycheck and the wife can stay home like Donna Reed and the kids all get raised right. We just don't have that economy. So I think it's two incomes pretty much to survive these days. And, whenever I hear millennial people that sometimes talk about this and they say, oh, I want to go back to the old way. The man needs to do this. Listen, that's wonderful. Find a time machine and go back to a time when that was even economically feasible. At this point, we survive or we don't. And, for this guy to be doing things and for her to be pulling back and saying, you know what, I'm going to cut it down to 20 hours a week. And I think you should pick up another job so I can have more free time. No. I think that whenever I hear somebody say, I want to retire in my 20s or 30s, no, we do not live in that world. You don't get to do that. If you have kids at home, we can have the conversation, but that isn't even going on. So to me, I'm looking at this fella and going, oh, buddy, stand up for yourself, draw this line, create a no boundary. She can say, hey, that's not what I want. Then my value system is that a man should do this. Okay, fine. You guys have discovered an area where you depart in your fundamental philosophies, but have that fight. That is my opinion. I'm keeping it out there. I'm not keeping it to myself.
No, yeah. I agree with a lot of that, but also, for him to be honest with what he's feeling. Yes. if he's feeling like that and he wants to put his foot down and say, this is my personal boundary and This is where I say no, and I'm not going to, put my own emotional, physical, mental health at risk by doing all these things. I'm just not going to do it. That's okay. And then it's going to be up to her to respect that or not, whatever.
So really, this boils down to expectations and boundaries. Being able to communicate effectively, what are our expectations in this relationship, and what are the things that I'm willing to sacrifice and assist with, and when do I draw the line? Getting back to the idea of this is kind of her goal, her dream. Well, that's great, but then at some point there probably has to be some boundary of what keeps us from going over the edge in the opposite extreme to where I'm completely carrying all of the responsibilities while you pursue your dream.
Yeah. And, I get so angry because I'm looking at this thing, she doesn't drive, she doesn't cook. She's cutting down her workload so that she can have more time. And, but I guess there's a part of me, Nick, that I hear this and go, well, you are starting a business. You're trying to become a cosmetologist. Even if you only are working 25 hours a week, that doesn't mean that you're sitting on your butt the other 20. You might be out there hustling, trying to get it done, marketing. So there's only one side of the story here. So I'm going to take a deep breath. Okay.
But you know
Jim's
what?
Calming down.
This sounds like a resentment waiting to happen.
Oh, absolutely. That's a good point. Yeah. If this is not talked about and dealt with, this could be something that could come up again and again for years.
Yeah. So I guess all three of the therapists in the room agree that even though there's a lot of room to discuss this, there's an opportunity to assert a boundary, to describe very sincerely how you feel, and bring that to the table. And don't retreat from it. Own your truth, because if you just accept this, I think that Sydney and Nick are right. You're gonna grow resentment, and you're gonna sit on your hands, and eventually this is gonna become poison in the relationship. So at least address it honestly.
Mm-hmm. Right. Absolutely. Okay. Our next one comes to us from Nicholas90, and he writes, how do you break free from the romantic/sexual fantasies of porn, movies, music, books, etc., and start viewing yourself and others through a more realistic lens?
I love this question. So in my private practice, the number one category of people that I treat are men and women who have sexual addictions and compulsive behaviors that have to do with porn, erotic fiction, and just misbehaving sexually. It's become a problem in their life. And so I'm really glad this person's writing in and saying, hey, I acknowledge that a delusion forms whenever I'm reading these books like 50 Shades of Grey or I'm watching porn too often. I start to have a misrepresented reality. Did you guys watch Friends back in the 90s? Remember that show? Mm-hmm. Okay, yes, you did, yeah. Nick. Nick was from Iowa, so they're just now getting Friends in Iowa.
Okay, we have some listeners from Iowa. So send your mail. Send your mail to Jim.
Yeah. More hate mail comes to Jim every week.
All of those from the Midwest.
There's an episode of Friends when the guys accidentally get pornography on their TV, and they get like a free channel, and they're scared to turn off the TV or turn the channel because they're scared they might lose it. So they watch it 24 hours a day. And a week later, Joey goes to the bank and he comes home and he looks at Chandler and goes, hey, I went to the bank today. He goes, what happened? He goes, well, there was a pretty female teller and I asked her to get me, my cash or whatever. And he says, well, then what happened? He says, well, she gave me the money. He goes, and then what happened? He goes, nothing. I walked out. And he goes, she didn't invite you back to the vault to have sex? And he goes, no, it didn't happen. What the? And they're like, that's so weird. And I'm like, today I was at the grocery store and nobody offered to have sex with me. And they're both like, wait a minute. Like, we're having a very fake view of reality. I think that we're starting to watch too much of this. And I think that they put a fine point on this a long time ago, that if you're engaging in the erotic fictions or, pornography and stuff, it's not like this inherently going to ruin your life kind of thing. But anything in balance, right? And so if you're overdoing it, you can create a delusion. And so the writer's acknowledging that and saying, how do you address that? This kind of resembles a conversation Nick and I had last week about video game addiction. My advice is to begin with a detox. We have to recalibrate your brain and kind of refamiliarize you with what is normal human interaction, what is a real relationship, what is real sexuality that's not hyperbolic and caricature and fictionalized. And so I kind of want you to step away from those other enhanced sexual kind of experiences and detox yourself for something like 90 to 120 days and attempt to normalize sexuality first. And I think if you can accomplish that, then we can start a slow relearning process of actually what sex is and what, it isn't. But this, guys, is a huge problem now. And I pass it to you guys because one of the things we're seeing is people in their 20s, teenagers who grew up in the age of high definition, available online pornography, who have a really false view of what sex is. And I think this spills over into the larger culture. We're seeing the Me Too movement and a conversation about what does consent look like. And sexuality is at the forefront of the national conversation. And what this guy's writing about, I think, is a factor in all this. What do you guys think?
I agree. I don't know if I have a whole lot to add to that. I mean, that's very well said, Jim. And I think, especially with the romantic idea of like even what a relationship looks like. We were kind of talking about this the other day when talking about like the Me Too movement and everything, and how Hollywood has kind of created this idea of what romance looks like. And romance looks like standing outside in the rain with a boombox over your head for the person that you really love.
John Cusack.
Yeah. But in real life, that's creepy.
Yes.
Yeah.
But don't do that.
Yeah. So there's
Stage
this.
4 clinger.
I think Sydney has stories. Yeah. I think she has stories.
So there's this contrast between what makes a really good movie and what is acceptable in reality.
So, Sydney, bring some female life experience to this. This, I'm sure, affects men. It affects women. But what are your thoughts on this caricature reality? Nick's pointing out it can happen in romance, too, and in sexuality. What do you think about that?
Yeah, well, I have a couple thoughts. But what was coming to my mind in this, too, is like maybe even from the other perspective is that, if they're creating a fantasy of this person, I'm just also thinking about a client that I worked with in the past who, had a fantasy of this type, right? But he had a really amazing girlfriend too, but she could never live up to the fantasy that he had in his head, and that's hard for the other person as well, if they're putting this, this object on a pedestal. How does the real person even, compete with that, And so, it can be affected on both sides. But I think awareness is the key. Everything you said, going back to baseline, and being aware that that's not healthy, that's not normal, and start challenging those, belief systems. But I had a mentor that once told me, like you take it back to the baseline, but they said, can you please yourself without anybody else? Because if you can't learn to even please yourself, without porn or without all these things, then how can you please somebody else, or how can somebody else please you?
Yeah.
And so take it back to the baseline.
That's self-awareness. And one thing that she just said, Nick, which I love so much, is this idea of the fantasy. And it goes back to what Nick was saying about how it's not true. Somebody made the joke that if 50 Shades of Grey took place in a trailer park, it'd be a very different story. It's like, the guy's not a millionaire. He's just this guy in a trailer park who beats you up. This is not the same story anymore. Now it's the stuff we see on Cops. And I just think that there's this fictionalization of sexuality. And, there's room for it, right? And that's entertainment, right? Just like we all enjoy a good rom-com. Nick more than most people. And so like, that's fun. And we, we like it and it's cheerful. And it's like, oh, that's cute. But we also know that that's not real life. And so when our next relationship doesn't look like that, we don't hold our relationship to that standard. But in sexuality, I think also people don't talk about sex very much. Mm-hmm. The three of us would probably sit down and talk about relationships and have lunch, but we probably wouldn't talk about the last time we had sex and how was that and what was normal.
Unless you were girls.
Yeah. Okay. Do the girls do this? Okay, good. I'm glad somebody is, because Nick will never tell me. I ask him every day. I said, "Are you satisfied in your sex life?" And he's like, "Jim, can we please just get back to work? This is harassment." Sydney, talk to him. Help him understand that I'm just a caring friend.
All right. Well, thank you for everybody who's written in. These were great. Thank you, Sydney, for being our guest and helping us out with that.
Oh,
that
finally.
was wonderful.
Finally, a real therapist in the room.
Yeah, exactly.
God, I was getting so sick of listening to us.
And so for our listeners, if you would like to write in and voice your opinion on which one of us should be replaced by Sydney, please feel free to do that. Now, Jim, you had a shout out.
I do have a shout out. If you like this podcast, that means you're interested in mental health, and I would recommend another podcast to you, Noggin Notes, with my buddy Jake Wiskirchen. He's the warden of the North, I like to say. He's up there in the godforsaken tundra of Reno, Nevada, which we do not speak of here in Las Vegas. But besides that, I like him. He's a good guy, good thoughts. Strongly recommend picking up Noggin Notes as a podcast. You will not regret it. All right, that's all the time we've got for this week's session. Thank you to those who contributed to our show today. We really appreciate it. Remember, pod therapy isn't something you should keep all to yourself. Help us reach others by sharing this episode. You can find us at podtherapy.net, on Facebook at facebook.com/podtherapy, or tweet to us at podtherapyguys on Twitter.
Help the people in your life by checking in on them and offering an open ear. You never know whose life might be changed by simply being available. I'm Nick Tanchman.
I'm Jim Jobin.
Thanks, and we'll see you for your appointment next week.